very much for watching KBC Channel 1. This is BizCheck. My name is Betty Kiptum and Anne Wangeshi is my colleague on the sign language interpretation. Now, over the next 2 hours, we shall be having conversations. The first hour, we shall be talking about the state of small and medium enterprises in Kenya, the challenges they are facing and the opportunities that there are. The second hour will be about quantity surveying in Kenya. What are the challenges and what is their role in supporting a thriving construction industry? So we get into that first conversation. Thank you very much for joining us. Today I am with Dennis Omulisia, who is the chairman of Western Elites Association. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Betty.
Karibu sana. Karibu. SMEs support the bulk of Kenya's economy. They provide over 80% of the jobs in this country. What is your inkling in terms of the state of SMEs in Kenya currently?
Thank you so much, Betty, for the latitude to be here. First of all, we all admire China as of now because of its greatness. And how did China become what it is today? It is because of what we call Chinese village enterprises. These were small enterprises that also can be referred to as SMEs of today. So they did move starting from the days of Chinese Mao, rather the chairman Mao. Then from there we went to now Deng in the 1980s. Now these SMEs or the Chinese village enterprises, which started in the villages, now they are the ones that now have grown into big companies. Now we're talking about Alibaba, we're talking about all other companies. In fact, most of the manufacturing now, in terms of manufacturing globally, is actually happening in China. Yeah. And most of the imports are actually coming from actually China. You're talking about the manufacturing, the technology. When you want to manufacture like for example, cooking oil, you mostly you will source from China. So now back to the now where we are, Kenya, whereby, as you have rightly put it, that we actually we are still driven by the SMEs. We are in that state that China was in those days, whereby you have said that 80% job creation. And also another fact is that according to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, is that we have them contributing 40% to our GDP. So that is very great. So if we were to go now to ask ourselves, what is the state of these SMEs currently? Mm-hmm. So number one, you look at it from this angle that we start with the first of all, which is very important, the credit. So, and this has been part of the government's monetary policy, whereby you realize when the current government came into power, we had very high interest rates, correct? And I think last year I was here and the interest rates were at around 20%. And then now the CBK came in and said, no, we want to actually lower these interest rates. So they started by actually lowering the CBR, the central bank rate, went down significantly from 13%. Now it has been lowering up to around 9%. So the banks now have been really aligning to that, and they have actually been able to reduce their interest rates from 20%. Now we are talking about 13.5 to around 15% there. So that is a very great thing. And then now we also look at another journey from the government perspective in terms of financing now still. We have seen interventions by the government. Number one was the issue of the Hustler Fund, which of course most SMEs have been really uptaking that. There are positives there. And we were talking, when I was here with your colleague, Mr. O'Brien, we were talking about increasing actually the size of that fund. At that time, I mean, we are talking about 500 shillings, but it is great that this fund continues to grow with time. And then let's now look at, we have other funds, of course, the Women Enterprise Fund, the Youth Fund, and all that. And and then also the government has been doing a lot now in terms of, we look at formalization of businesses, whereby you realize that businesses are able, those actually who are now to grow from a small business now to a company, it is been made easier with the aspect of the e-citizen, and the government has been really pushing the issue of the e-citizen and the issue of governments, rather companies being able to actually formalize themselves. When they formalize themselves, that means that they can now be able to tap into the credit that we're talking about. That means from actually banks, because you need formal credit to grow, Madam Betty. Yeah. You need formal credit to grow, and there is no way you are going to access that formal credit if you are not formalized.
Right.
So that is the state now. And then now there is also other trends that are on.
Let's just keep hold on that. I would like us to delve more into the issue of credit access.
Yes.
For SMEs. We know that despite the reduction of the rates by CBK, yes, banks are still doing risk-based lending.
Yes.
And for the most part, SMEs are still considered to be high-risk businesses, right?
Yes.
How can we ensure that the lenders are also aligned with these lower rates and at the same time offering credit that is affordable and accessible to the SMEs? Because if you're still lending to them on a risk-based lending calculation, so to say, that interest is still high for them, so it might still choke them. How can we make sure that the rates are actually reflecting for the SMEs?
Thank you so much. You know, at first, initially, we had the issue of the interest rate actually capping, whereby the government policy was that, rather the CBK was that let's have a ceiling, whereby more of it cuts across board. But of course, we saw that over time, it was the wisdom of the government that this was not feasible. So they said, let's now revert now to what we've talked about, the risk-based pricing. So that means you are, of course, given you're given a loan based on the risk, of course, that you possess. Okay, now the thing is that now we have to look at it from this angle, that of course the risk-based pricing is of course the best to operate with. But then how can we then ensure that these interest rates, like for example, most likely, of course, ordinarily, SMEs will of course attract a high interest rate, because banks themselves, they are focused on the issue of cash flows, which of course you realize that SMEs will not have a very strong actually cash flows. Then you'll talk about the issue of even the management aspect, like how are they managing the finances, the businesses, the ability to actually to repay. But then the best way that we can do to ensure that they don't suffer under, of course, the new regime that we are getting into is actually to ensure that these banks are able also, or lenders, they are actually able to look at the potential of these SMEs, not just from the point of cash flows. Sometimes the cash flows might not be so promising, they might not be so promising, but there is the issue of the potential that they have. And then the issue of these banks being able, of course, to assist them in terms of management so that they become more for credit worthy to them. Yeah, because here we are talking about actually the ability to repay, as I've said, and then number two, we are actually looking at their management. So that is how the banks should approach that issue, so that these SMEs are not exposed to high interest rates, because now they have now that discretion to actually to price them or give them loans based on how they deem actually they should give them. Yeah, thank you.
The issue of formalization that you had brought up earlier, there are a lot of SMEs that are yet to be formalized, and they are locked out of accessing credit. They are locked out of accessing government tenders, that are very lucrative as well. So how can we ensure that we are formalizing more SMEs? There is, of course, the part of sensitization and awareness as to the benefits of formalizing your business. And what does formalizing a business even look like?
Thank you so much. Yeah, the issue of formalization, very critical, bearing in mind that according to the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, is that 79%, around 79% of businesses, actually these SMEs, they are actually not formalized. Yeah, so they are not formalized. So then you realize that, as I've said, as I've alluded, is that they'll not be able to enjoy actually some of the great things that you have mentioned, really. So the thing is that now realizing that they're not formalized, it's about now the government and of course other sectors, other players coming in and of course sharing with them the importance of the importance of actually formalization. What are some of the benefits that they will get if they formalize themselves? That you are able to tell them that, look, you are going actually to actually be able to access credit, formal credit. We're not talking about the Shylock credit. You're not talking about the, of course, SACCOs also play a critical role, but of course they will not provide that capital or loans that are actually can make them to really grow to significant levels. So number two is that, of course, to also inform them that the goodness, of course, formalizing yourself is you can also, of course, do now export, because exportation, when you talk about the issue of the export, you're talking about being a formal entity. Yeah, and then even to import, it's always good when you are actually a formal entity. So another thing is actually the campaigns, of course, which can actually come in. Of course, we have channels like the media and all that. But we are very hopeful, very optimistic that with now these SMEs and people getting more enlightened and educated, they're going actually to be able to go into the formal space. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned China and how they took advantage of their SME sector, so to say, to create the global conglomerates that we know now. What is stopping Kenya, or what lessons can be picked from their journey? Because a very huge percentage of our SMEs do not hit their 5th birthday. So businesses are being born and they die. They keep being born and they die. And so what can be done to ensure that businesses are moving from that part of SMEs, to now grow into corporations so that others can also keep growing and the economy grows?
Thank you so much. So we have to look at China, as I've said, is that the growth was primarily because there was government goodwill. So we're talking about the legal and the regulatory space. It was actually enabling growth of these SMEs. So the government was playing a very huge role in terms of being able to actually to cluster them. So they being told that now you want to do, we are grouping you here, be able to do, for example, be in the textile space. And then the others are able to do, another portion of course, businesses. So that number one is that you ensure that there was an issue of supply of what is needed, correct? So if we have, of course, the government has analyzed and realized that, for example, this is the shortage that we are having, for example, of, let's say for sunflower, of course, to do manufacturing of cooking oil, then you realize that the government can be able to look at what are some of the areas that, of course, are very ideal for growth of actually sunflower. And I think the government in the 1970s was really trying to do that, whereby you realize that we have those regions that were being, of course, set aside. These ones are for sugarcane, for example, others for coffee and all that. So, and then we talked about the issue of China itself was able actually to come in and even focus on the issue of education, whereby the chairman Deng, or the president during that time, who was Deng, was able to say, let them, of course, be able to be educated and acquire relevant skills. And then we also have this Deng, the president of that day, was able actually to also say, let him go and bring in actually outside capital. So that means he was going to the United States, basically the West, and of course bringing them in to invest. And when they were, of course, investing, of course, he promised them that we will, of course, give you, of course, offer you good market, and of course, we also talk about cheap labor. Then from there, number one is that they were able actually to have themselves growing. Then number two, we also had the issue of also them being able to actually adopt technologies that actually these outside companies were actually bringing in. So that means you're able to copy the skills and the technologies. And then we also have another very critical thing that they used to do. We talked about the government aspect, environment around being able to protect their businesses. So that is called, of course, protectionism, whereby we're saying that we are strong in this, so we are not allowing outside competition. And I think that is a common practice even currently, whereby you are realizing with the current president, of course, Trump. So he's talking about the issue of tariffs and all that. He's talking about America first. So it's actually about, for these SMEs to grow, is then about what I've said, basically, that the government has to really continue pushing from the issue of the credit access, where, of course, in collaboration with banks and other lenders, is very critical. From parts of the e-citizen continuing to push towards that, and the financing that's available, like the Hustler Fund and all that, they can continue actually to scale that size so that they're able to access, capital that is more, can actually grow them. We talked about this fund, if it could grow to even 20,000, for example. That one is actually great for them to actually to operate. Yeah.
You talked about the issue of access to markets, and when you're talking about accessing export markets, it's a whole other ballgame. And one of the challenges that was coming out yesterday, agricultural stakeholders were saying that the certifications and the standards that are required in the export market are very difficult for small businesses to access or to attain, so that they can access those markets. So I'd like to hear from you what steps can be taken, because there's a lot of aggregation that has to be done for small businesses to access the export markets. Sometimes a small business cannot fill 2 containers that are required, but when they work with 2 or 3 other businesses, they can do it. So what actionable steps can be taken to open up the markets for the small businesses without necessarily, making them debt-laden, so to say?
Thank you so much. And again, we start with the government, and it's just recently you heard that Kenya and Uganda, they entered into a very great partnership, whereby I realized that these commodities now are not attracting the issue of so much taxes. So we are on the border, so we can really trade. That's about to start with regional integration. So the East African community with the 300 million plus, I mean, in terms of the market size, is great. Then we have seen even from the African context, we have actually the African Union trying to really push for us having a free trading zone in terms of in Africa. But then we come into, back into this country, whereby you realize that most of our exports are actually outside Africa. And you realize that the US now, they're talking about the issue of tariffs. I think we were actually embossed 10%, but I don't know if it really came into effect. So you realize that I've talked about governments globally trying to do what we call protectionism, but as ourselves as now as a country, we have then to look at, of course, how we can boost our what we call our balance of payments. Of course, that basically means you're talking about having a good trade position. Now, that means you have then to get back into the country and say, how are you going, for example, the commodities that you have talked, like you have talked about, that number one, you are in a situation whereby these SMEs, they cannot be able actually to do ship one container solely actually. They have actually to group themselves. And I've talked about the issue of agglomeration, them being able to be actually be grouped together actually, so that then they can actually match their strength and be able to manage like our whole container. Then number two, we have the issue of the taxes, correct? Mm-hmm. We have to look at how can we maybe continue now to lower the export tax and of course other regulations. We have a lot of actually documentation that is needed. In terms of the licenses, the papers that you need. But most of the time, that's why most of the time, you realize that we only have a few companies that are able actually to do the export. But then they really will be focusing on, of course, the big players. So it's about the government coming in to say, just the way we are doing with the Hustler Fund and the other capital, and other initiatives, how can we, of course, provide a situation whereby we can facilitate them being able to export commodities. And then another thing is, again, still on the issue of the capital, it will always be cross-cutting because it's an enabler. You need capital actually to be able to do the export space. So those are some of the areas that we have to look at in order to then boost our exports. So SMEs have a very huge role to play in that space. Mm-hmm.
Kenya is a net importer.
Yes.
And there is quite an opportunity for SMEs to even satisfy or take up the demand that is there in the country, right? Please speak to that.
Yeah, you have said it correctly. We are actually having a trade deficit. That is correct. And then that is because most of the businesses that SMEs get into is actually what we call import substitution areas, whereby you're saying we are doing sugar, for example, that's farmers now. That's on the part of farmers, but it can still be imported. So you realize that when you are in such an angle, you are not very viable actually as a country from an economic perspective. Then you have to focus really on how you're going to promote exports. That means manufacturing, which is very key. We maybe move away from exporting raw materials. Of course, you cannot really totally move out of exporting raw materials, because there was an anecdote actually about, for example, coffee. We have the CEO, a certain CEO, who was talking about, he went to the US and he was looking at this coffee that actually he exports in raw form, realizes that it's almost more even 50 times when it's processed there in the US. So the thing is that if we can really focus our effort on actually manufacturing, we can actually be able to try and actually offset that. And the government has been continuing to promote that in terms of the EPZ, the export processing zones. Recently we have one that actually came up in Busia. It's called Nasewa EPZ. So that means that the government is really trying to actually change that situation. So if the government can continue with that effort, we're going to be in a situation whereby we can really try to change, to try and actually improve the situation and have a position whereby now we are having a trade surplus. Yeah.
That's very important. There's the issue of technology uptake for SMEs. It is still a challenge because of many reasons. Sometimes it's because of lack of understanding. Other times it's because of the affordability of this technology that is required for them to scale. What is your take on SMEs' uptake of technology in this country?
Thank you so much. So the issue of technology, we should be in Africa top in terms of mobile use. I'm talking about the smartphones, the internet, and all that. So the thing is that, okay, let's look even trading, which is now moving into e-commerce, correct? Then we look at even the issue of payments. You realize that they're going digital. When talk about the banking space, around 80% now is moved under the digital banking. But then you've rightly put it that we have those SMEs. Should be majority of them. They are not actually adopting technology, but that should be in the interior, because in towns you have a situation whereby most of the businesses are now transacting via e-commerce, as I've said, and even their payments and all that. So the issue of accessibility of technology is also a critical area that we actually have to focus on, so that when it comes to payments, we can actually be in a digital fashion, because the world now is going actually digital. We have the AI and all that. But then you realize that currently the providers of such technologies, even the drones and all that, they are in a situation whereby they cannot be afforded by, for example, a farmer there in the village. But then the thing is about, again, the government continuing to manufacture actually internally or domestically its own technology, because you realize most of the technology we are importing. So that means it will be a bit costly for these SMEs. So if we can actually work on those areas in terms of also training them, there is the issue of affordability and training them. Do they really understand or know about e-commerce? Can they maybe use drones? All those aspects. So it's about training, which is also very important. We can really train them through the groups and all that. Then if we were also to really go deeper, it's about working with various, actually the banks and other players, actually private players, to actually come in and actually offer these technologies at a very subsidized rates. Yeah.
When we talk about the people who are now in SMEs, entry of SMEs into the market, let's talk about skill gap. You talked about the management issues that are there, management inefficiencies, so to say, in SMEs. Tell us more about that. What is lacking in terms of the way SMEs are managed as opposed to how big corporations are managed? Where is the mismatch there?
Thank you so much. You know, it's number one, the issue of corporate governance. So the issue of corporate governance, you realize that it's about these big businesses really focus on corporate governance in terms of even balance of course, powers there, the internal processes, how are they going to actually operate, very important. But then, on the other part, SMEs, you realize that is more of a sole proprietorship, whereby we only have one individual. So this one individual is the CEO, is actually the chairman of the business, is doing everything. So that means that if these SMEs have to grow, they have to focus on corporate governance. Of course, from that small perspective that they are in, that's number one. How can they manage themselves? What practices can they have? We have the issue of the bookkeeping. For example, you realize that most of them don't actually do bookkeeping. We have the issue of also, if you're not, of course, keeping your books, you'll not know your position. Actually, you have to know what is actually your, for example, financial position. Most of them don't know. But actually, with training, we see even banks, circles, etc., coming in to try and actually work with them in that journey to ensure that then they're able to be aligned in terms of that aspect. And then another constraint that is actually making them not to grow and be like, big companies is actually the aspect of capital still. But that one we have really exhausted that aspect.
Yeah.
The capital aspect, very critical. And then basically I've talked about the issue of management is what is actually a challenge. Decision making, also the issue of lacking long-term planning. You realize that most of them, you rightly put it at the start that most 70% of them, or 3 out of 5 of them, don't actually survive within 3 years. They don't go beyond that, or to 5 years. They don't go beyond that, and that is because most of them get into this business as a way of actually surviving as they look forward to formal employment. Maybe someone was fired from his job, then he's just focusing on, let me have this for the interim as I work on getting employment. And then number two, even those that have never been employed, they're really looking forward to, as a temporary aspect, as I work towards now moving to actually be employment. So it's also actually a matter of longevity, whereby is your mindset in a long-term perspective, or you're just there as a survival actually mechanism. So if you look at the large, corporates, they are focused on long-term, 5 years, 10 years and all that. So long-term planning, very critical in that aspect. We've talked about, talk about the issue of insurance also. You able to see that insurance, we are still very low, 2% in the country. We are below 2% in terms of insurance coverage. So that means that if you are not insured, when disaster strikes, like I think around 2023, 24 there, we had the issue of floods that were sweeping businesses and bringing them down. So if you are not insured, that's a very huge problem that you will be into. So those are some of the areas that are actually making them not to grow to a large space.
Right.
Yeah.
That means that there's a perspective challenge there, because you're saying a lot of people are going into business as placeholders.
Correct.
Let me do this, nione kama itajipa mahali. Yeah?
Yes.
So for people to, when you're dealing with that mindset, a lot of young people, this country has a very high unemployment rate. And of course, small businesses are one way to solve the challenge. If anything, they're the biggest employers currently.
Yes.
So what can you tell young people in terms of changing their mindset on how they look at business, from being a placeholder to something that can actually transcend their own lives? There are people who've set up companies, and years after they are gone, those companies are still thriving. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for that great question, Betty. Yeah, so you rightly put it again, 80% of these SMEs providing actually employment in this country. Of course, then that means that the youth, the women and all that, they have actually to actually look at how can they actually get into these businesses as a way, of course, having their sustainable income. You know, the issue of the long-term mindset is actually very critical. So if they can come in and they have actually acquired the right skills, you know, from an entrepreneurship perspective, you know, that means they can actually be able to actually change their lives. You know, you can change your life when you start your own business and grow. You can actually be, when you're having challenges, for example, finance. You know, currently banks, we have so many banks that are now offering what we call non-secured or unsecured lending. That means maybe you're having a challenge to do with the collateral. They can actually offer you a credit minus collateral, but that means then you have to be well managed, you know, in terms of the books. But banks also try their best to actually walk the journey with you. So as long as you actually even try to formalize yourself, I mean, that's a very great way to do it. So the main thing here is that these youth, you know, the women and all that, to look at it from that angle, that they can be able to grow, they can be able to access training that is actually available, to be able then to actually to grow. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You talked about a lot of SMEs being in import substitution areas.
Yes.
I would like to hear from you what other opportunities exist, you know, so that you're not always doing import substitution. What opportunities exist that young people can go into?
Thank you so much. We have number one, technology. The world is, is now technologically driven, you know, and so if they have skills in the technology space, mm-hmm. And then there is no more, it's a global thing, you can be able even to actually offer technological support to even someone in the US and all that. And then in terms of agriculture now, we have those crops that are actually, of course, they can't be substituted. We talked about the issue of coffee, for example, and you have seen the government continuing to promote the issue of coffee growing in the country. We talked about the tea and all that. So there are opportunities that exist that actually will not actually expose you to actually imports. You know, the imports substitution crops are known, as I've said. The crops are known, like the sugar, you know, sugarcane aspect, and those other areas, the rice and all that. So I've talked about technology. They can embrace that. There is the issue of manufacturing, light manufacturing. You will not really face a lot of competition in some areas. Like when you talk about cooking oil, of course we have an issue of most of it being imported, but if we can grow actually domestically, we can be able to actually to offset that. So because there is, there is always a lot of demand for that. Yeah, so those are some of the areas that they can actually be able to focus on. Yeah.
Right. So when you're thinking of growing your SME, yeah,
yes.
You've already established you have good corporate governance. You have great borrowing. That process of now exiting that bracket called the SMEs, how does that look like?
Thank you so much. In terms of how you can exit, of course, you're talking about transitioning now.
Yes.
Correct? Mm-hmm. You are very stable. So that means transitioning basically starts with formalization that we have talked about.
Yeah.
And we have said that the government has made it very easier for you to be able to formalize yourself. Talked about the e-citizen. Actually, just at the comfort of your seat, you can be able to register that company. So you have yourself formalized. And then number two, you then move from a point of key man's risk. That means the I position to us, you know. So, most of them, of the SMEs, they are run by just one individual most times. So you realize, and also they are holding into that, like they have that concept that this is my business, I don't want other people in. So that means you transition, then you have also to look at now, how can you now embrace putting up teams? You have people, another one can focus, for example, on operations, another one finance, all that. So, and that of course falls into the ambit of corporate governance that I've mentioned. Very critical, the issue of corporate governance. And then also you have to then focus on capital. And capital, it can be in form of bank loans, or also it can be in terms of bringing in other equity, investors. That means your business, once you have registered it, or when you're registering, you tell yourself that instead of actually having 100%, because it doesn't make sense having, 100% of, for example, 10 million. It's better you have even 5% of 100 million. It makes sense. So that means you then have to look at that angle. So if you are in a position whereby you have good teams with you, you have good capital access, then you also have you have a situation whereby you are well managed now. You have actually then to focus on how you're going to actually improve your management position. And that means bringing in people that can actually plug into the skills that you don't have. Maybe you are, of course, you are strong, for example, in, let's talk about the clothing space, just an example. So you are good at bringing in customers, all that. But then you are not good in the finance world. Then you tell yourself that you're going to bring in someone to actually to assist you. So it's a very exciting journey. And I've said that number one, it starts with just being able to formalize so that you are actually able to be a corporate entity. Very, 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 very important. So then you will also be looking at a situation whereby you can align also to the government policy. When you're not formalized most of the time, means you are not being exposed to a lot of legal and regulatory space, aspects, the licenses and all that. So you also have to focus on how you're going to align yourself to ensure that legally and, of course, from a regulatory perspective, you are very solid. So those are some of the actions that actually you have to focus on in order to transition yourself.
Right. A very big issue right now is environmental responsibility. There is the issue of climate change, and it has come down that businesses must do business that is sustainable. So incorporating sustainability into a small business, please tell us about that. Thank you.
The issue of sustainability is very important. We have globally, we have seen initiatives, the World Bank, the United Nations and all that, being able to focus on the green space. And even the government itself, we have the issue of actually the carbon credits, that are coming in for these businesses to actually to go green. So it is, and also being able to reduce their carbon footprint as a business, and all that. So there are so many opportunities that are available for these businesses, funds that really available for them to actually go green. And sustainability actually cuts across. You talk about even CSR, the corporate social responsibility is also part of, actually, we talk about sustainability. Most of them are doing that. But then most of it that you realize that this CSR is being exercised by large corporates. But still SMEs can do that in the small ways that they can. So the issue of really tackling our green aspect in terms of reducing our carbon footprint and all that, it's actually something that we should all embrace. and that means even going the technology's way, the way we are doing. You realize that now businesses are trying to also go cashless, you know. I mean, here even in towns, you realize most times now people are not using cash in their endeavors, actually, their payments and all that. So it is actually a lot about these SMEs, and actually largely the businesses trying to really focus on those opportunities that are available, trying to tap into relevant training to be able to align, because we say that this is we all have, it's a world that we have. There is no other maybe planet that we can live into. We all have this world, so we have to focus really on how to reduce that carbon footprint and all that, going green.
Right. So what is the future of SMEs in Kenya?
Thank you so much. So the future or the outlook, it looks promising if, number one, the government can really continue with the initiatives of reducing the capital, rather the credit rate. So because that is the cost of capital, and most businesses are relying on actually financing, you know, outside financing, mostly loans, as we have said. So the outlook, it will continue being, of course, very strong and, of course, bullish if that can continue, because that's what we've been grappling with from that space. Number two, we are going to really see a continuation in terms of uptake of actually technology, the e-commerce, you know, the digital payments and all that. We have a very strong, what we call our pride, the M-Pesa, for example. We realize that most businesses are embracing that. So that is actually going to continue from an outlook perspective. We are also going to see them continuing actually to actually focus on formalization. Now that we've talked about us having a situation whereby it has been made more easier in terms of the e-citizen and all that, they are going actually to formalize themselves and grow into great giants, as we talked about the China and all that, those companies. So they are going to continue. So with technology, we have a very strong youth population, should be around 60%. And now that most of them are exposed to technology, you know, the AI and all that, we realize that they're going to continue to adopt that now. When they go into business, now that it is an SME space, it's an area that provides 80% of that job creation, they are going actually to adopt that. And that's a very strong reality in terms of how they do trading and all that. So we are also going to see government actually continuing to come in. The funds that are available under the government, of course, better agenda, they're still very strong, but they have to continue, of course, working on that. And then we are also going to see a situation whereby, we talked about Uganda, whereby we now have a situation whereby we agreed, entered into a partnership to really do business together, trading and all that, and there's no attraction of huge taxes or zero taxes. So realize that regionally we are going to continue growing, and that means that SMEs are being to be able even to export what they have, the produce they have, you know, the light manufacturing and all that, and even Africa actually globally, and actually globally. So there are other areas that, of course, we have to look at from the outlook. Those are the challenges that we'll really continue facing, and that will mean in terms of infrastructure, the issue of access to roads, electricity is still costly, you know, the issue of internet, you know, but of course the government really tried to focus on the issue of the last mile connectivity in terms of electricity. But then the issue of the roads, of course, that has to continue. The issue of, on the part of financing, it's basically about ensuring that we have the issue of these SMEs being banked. So the banks have to continue permeating and penetrating in the interior to ensure that these businesses, the SMEs, are able to be banked so that they can actually acquire actually reasonable capital. Yeah.
Right. So as we come to a close of the conversation, if someone is watching and they have just started a small business or they want to get into business, what would be your message to them?
Thank you so much. So they have to know that number one is business when as an entrant, it's about you being sacrificing yourself most of the time. We have talked about at the start you are the messenger, you are the CEO, you are everything. But of course it's about being very resilient, resilient in terms of that, so that your business can actually work, pick up and grow into a great business, actually a company and all that. Mm-hmm. Number two is that actually to tell them, of course, to embrace technology. Now that we are in a technology space, everything now, almost everything is now about technology. So they have to really adopt that. They also have to have a positive mindset so that we're not having a situation whereby you are getting in because it's just more of an interim way as you await employment or a big opportunity somewhere. So it's about then them really coming in with a strong mindset that this is what I'm going to actually to earn from, and I can also grow it to even survive 300 years. You know, we have businesses set up by people like the Rothschilds and all that. They have thrived for 300 years plus. That means you can be able to grow it, be your income earner, and also leave it for your generations. So yeah. Then they have to focus on the available opportunities in terms of capital. A lot of them are available. We have the issue of the government policy because most of the businesses suffer from that angle, knowing what licenses do I need, when should I maybe pay my taxes and all that. So it is actually something with strong positives and also challenges. So they should be ready for both. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. I'll give you 30 seconds to tell us your closing remarks.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It's actually about let's continue growing these small businesses that we have into giants. The government to continue actually offering that supportive role, the banks and all that, because the future looks very great and bright for us. So it's about continuing to focus on how this business can grow and they can actually thrive so that we can reach to the levels like China that we have mentioned and other great giants globally. So let's keep going and the future looks great. Thank you. The future looks great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have been speaking with Dennis Omulisia, who is the chairman of Western Elites Association, and we have been talking about the state of small and medium enterprises in this country, the challenges that they are facing, as well as how to ensure that they grow into large corporations that even transcend the lives of the founders. Well, that is our first conversation of this morning on BizCheck. In the next hour, we shall be talking about matters construction and the role of quantity surveyors in ensuring that we have a safe and functioning construction industry. Do stay with BizCheck. My name is Betty Kiptum. See you after this quick break.